Now it's time, keynote interview with Mr. John Merkin. So doing the interviewing is Mr. Chuck Bedsole, Senior Managing Director for Ankura. We've talked about Ankura. You met Manuel earlier and all the things that they do, but I want to tell you a little bit about Chuck. Chuck is also been a mentor of mine, even though I date him by about 10 years, but it's just been a remarkable friendship, and I've been so fortunate to been engaged with he and his teams at the different places where he's been. Chuck brings an extraordinary wealth of insight and information to the hospitality industry, both on the lodging side and the food and beverage side. He's been involved in some of the large M&A activities. He's been involved in some of the biggest workouts and restructurings that have been undertaken in the United States and around the world. Also fluent in Spanish. He has worked extensively in South America and Latin America, and typically heads up the Latin America and South America verticals in the organizations that he works with. We're always fortunate to have him with us. Please welcome Chuck Bedsole. And his subject for the day is Mr. John Merkin, also a longtime friend. I first met John when he came down to recruit on behalf of Holiday Inns at the Hilton College. And we've been friends ever since. Today, he's the Chief Operating Officer and Partner for Tujo Hospitality Group. And in that group, is a franchisee of IHOP. And John, how many do we have now? 14, 15, 16?
22.
There you go. I'm a step behind. I was never good at math, but that's good. Thank you. But prior to this, John was operated the big Merchandise Mart hotel there in Chicago, and he went on to be in the franchise side of hotels for the IHG group, and then he went to Popeyes, Dine Equity, and now he's swinging the bat on his own down in Atlanta and being very successful. And I'm going to give you this tip, and I promise you there was no inside information, but I bought stock at every company John has gone to work at, and I have made money every single time. So thank you very much for that. So ladies and gentlemen, please welcome John Merkin.
Well, thank you, Dr. Barth, and it's a pleasure to be here with everyone and with John today and with those folks that are online. Just a little sidebar here in terms of Dr. Barth and our relationship. We met actually 20-something years ago through Cliff Rissman, who was here and was part of an earlier presentation. And Cliff introduced us, and Dr. Barth was talking about this conference that he had envisioned. And I think he had, with Rick, I think they had done one version of the conference at the hotel school before we got involved. And I went, or maybe two, but in any event, I went and thought that, this is kind of an interesting event where we can go business to business in terms of the advisory world to attorneys. But what I didn't know of was all of the ancillary benefits of the relationship with Dr. Barth and U of H. And that has manifested itself over the years in probably some of the most top-notch young people that we've been able to recruit. And in my case, over the span of 4 firms with EY, PwC, Alvarez and Marsal for 15 years, and now almost 3 years at Ankura. So, and one of those characters presented earlier. So it's been a wonderful relationship. And I'll tell you, the next time I come here, when we give a Lifetime Achievement Award, I'd like to propose that it goes to Dr. Barth, because he has given so much back. And just one ancillary story there. He had met my son, who was making his college decision years ago, and he said, come on down. My son was playing baseball. U of H has got a good team. We'll see about getting you in front of the coach, and blah, blah, blah. And he did such a good job with my son that my son ended up going to Texas Tech. So,
Which was an actual win for me.
Which was a win because he was a Tech alum, or is a Tech alumni. So in any event, I really appreciate the relationship. And your team, by the way, does an outstanding job. And I said 2 years ago before the pandemic, sometimes you get what you wish for. I said, if I never go to another conference again, I'll be fine in my career. And then you don't go for a couple of years and you genuinely miss it. So it's great to be back here. Thank you. And you do a great service. And I tell you what, this is not pandering to today's audience, but this is probably the best curriculum of all of these. It gets better and better, but today and the presenters were outstanding and very topical. So we thank you for that. So let's move on to John. You've seen his CV, and I told him the other day, I said, I'm just stunned at this, that we haven't met along the way. And I should point out that John is not a lawyer. Have you played one on TV? I don't know if you've never been. Okay. But he's had, fortunately or unfortunately, he's had a lot of experience in dealing with lawyers. So what I'd like to do is start today's question, and it's pretty robust. So let's start off, John, by exploring your career in terms of, give us an overview of your career as it relates to the franchising world, and how, as it's evolved, how you've adapted.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. I've always focused on franchisee-franchisor relationships. So in Southern Illinois, where I'm from, so I don't speak another language, I barely speak English. The idea of being part of a franchise was something that I learned very early on, because my father was a food and beverage director and a chef, and had 10 Holiday Inn hotels all throughout Southern Illinois and Western Kentucky. And we, so just kind of grew up, worked all the holidays, worked all the banquets, all those things. And so coming out of my undergrad, I decided that I would look to join the parent company. So I went to work for Holiday Corporation, and the idea there was I wanted to be in human resources, right? Because I had had such a good experience of kind of learning through school and figuring out how to help people grow their careers, that I thought HR was going to be the way to go. When I joined the company, I came down to San Antonio. We opened up a new hotel down there on the Riverwalk and implemented an IT system, right? The POS system, or the check-in system. And we got to install those. And before I knew it, all of a sudden, I was being asked to move to Memphis. And when I went to Memphis, joined I thought I was going to go into human resources, but they put me in IT instead. So for the next couple of years, I spent, probably traveled throughout the world, installed 700 of these systems, and consulted against these systems about how to make sure that you're making the most of what you're paying for in a franchise. And so after that, then I was like, maybe I can get into training, and that'd be my entree into human resources. So I get into training. I'm working on affirmative action reports and things that are happening within the company, making sure diversity is in place. And after that, I was asked to do college recruiting. So I can't remember what the organization was, Stephen, but we would come and do college recruiting and try to get people in. And all of a sudden, it got hard because our company got bought out by a British company. We were moved from Memphis, where I'd met my wife. We got married a year earlier, thought we'd always be in Memphis. That was the headquarters for Holiday Inn, and ended up, nope, it's time to go to Atlanta. And so I had to kind of stop doing college recruiting for a while and staff up a headquarters, because only about 300 people out of 3,000 were moved once this buyout occurred from Memphis to what became now Intercontinental Hotels Group. So we were staffing lawyers, we were staffing accountants, all these things. Then I went back into college recruiting once we kind of stabilized, and found out that from a corporate point of view, sometimes the HR department wasn't all about training. It was about a lot of controlling, or a lot of putting out fires, or a lot of the things that didn't seem as fun as career development would be for people to grow their careers. And so I decided at that point that I was going to go back into operations, get my general manager certification, move to Chicago. I get up to Chicago, I'm the assistant GM of 500-room hotel downtown, and all of a sudden my position's eliminated. So here I am thinking for life I'm going to be with this company, and I ended up having to switch hotels and moved over to become the guest services director of the other 500-room hotel company managed that was in Chicago. And at that time, I'm like, well, I might as well go to school and go for a graduate degree while I'm here during that time. And so I was able to get my MBA. As soon as that happened, then I moved back to Atlanta and was able to go into franchise services. And from that point on, just completely kind of changed my whole mindset. My MBA was in marketing because when you talk about brands, the brand is the idea of we are selling business systems. And when you sell a business system, you got to find ways to support it. And then you got to find ways to drive business to it. And so bringing that mindset into working with franchisees, making sure that they're getting the full benefit of their license agreements and making sure that there is a business system that's replicable and one that allows growth for franchisees. And then when you find out that it has to be a win-win relationship between franchisees and the parent corporation. And so I moved up and became head of franchise services for the Holiday Inn brands at that point. Then finance happened. We were, again, merged in with another company. And when we were merged in together, then I moved to marketing for a while. Then I came back to my favorite position of all time, which was VP of Franchise Administration. And in franchise administration, we had 7 brands at that time. And it was really the business-to-business relationship that you were just mentioning. And that just became so much fun to interact and to do workouts and to try to find solutions. And from that point on, really enjoyed it. We ended up having to do some projects, and then the Great Recession hit. And with that, I took a goodbye present from the company and then moved to the restaurant industry. And then I ended up with Dine Equity at the time. They're now called Dine Brands, which is IHOP and Applebee's, and had the opportunity there to do global development for both for the IHOP brand as well as international operations. And then from that point became Senior VP of Operations. And then having spent that time in California, my wife was ready to go back to Atlanta. And since it was the 3rd time that we had moved back to Atlanta, we decided to stay. And I became the Chief Operating Officer of Popeyes. And so really learned a lot from 3 of what I considered the best franchisors at that time. And then after we got bought out at Popeyes, I decided to join the other side, become a franchisee, and it's much more relaxed on this side than on the other side.
So John, getting just circling back, as they say these days in these interviews, to your early days at Holiday Inn, did you ever have a chance to interact with Kemmons Wilson and some of the major players early on? A guy named Mike Harrell comes to mind that I used to work for. I mean, those were really, you talk about pioneers along with the Marriotts of the world and others, the Hiltons. I mean, how impactful was that? Was your interactions with those fellows?
Yeah, the Wilson family was very, very important, obviously, to the history of the brand. They with Mike Rose had kind of built up a conglomeration. The funny thing is that while my dad and I had worked in Holiday Inns on franchise side, they would have their franchise conference and Kemmons would dance with all the wives. So my mother got to dance with Kemmons. Mm-hmm. So that was a lot of fun.
Well, he was on the cover of Time magazine at one point, so that's pretty good for your mom, I would say. Yeah, it was probably a thrill. So before we drop down and get into more of the franchise issues as it relates to legal and working with attorneys, just coming out of the pandemic, and I mean, what are your thoughts on the franchising world in general as it relates to restaurants and hotels specifically?
I do some litigation support on the side of these things, and I think the hardest concept for a franchisee to reconcile with is that they are buying time, and the franchise agreement is time, but they don't own the brand, they don't control the brand. But if you're a really good franchisor, you make your franchisees feel welcome. Even in tough situations, that opportunity to have dialogue and to be able to see each other's positions. But we're in the situation right now of buying out our senior partner, and this gentleman has worked in the brand for 35 plus years, doesn't have children, this is all that they know. And then whenever they see that it's close to the end, it becomes very difficult and emotion to kind of move people on. And there's not a lot of exit strategies. I was in a franchisee association meeting last week in Vegas, and they had a special session on succession planning, which is basically how to sell your business and be able to move on. But it's something that takes a lot of work. But this whole concept of you're selling time as a franchisor is a pretty key concept that a lot of franchisees will think that it's just always going to be an ATM no matter what.
So just again, following up on some of the earlier presentations in terms of your role and your experience with the franchising model, both in the hotel and restaurant world, internationally, what are the key differences in how you go about the business side on the international expansion of your franchise base?
On the restaurant side, it becomes very difficult because restaurants tend to have more proprietary items, right? So with Popeyes, there's a secret recipe, right, about what's spicy and not spicy, right? But being able to have those recipes done correctly in a different environment is difficult. There tend to be the kitchens. I can't remember. It's not consignment. There's another word for having a shared kitchen kind of setup that's there that go across brands. That tends to happen more internationally. The whole supply chain is difficult. So with IHOP, the issue would have been a bag of flour that was for the pancakes might have a shelf life of 6 months. But if it takes 3 months to get it overseas on a boat, then all of a sudden you've got a much shorter life expectancy for that bag of flour, right? So just figuring out those kinds of issues become difficult. The other aspect is brands will tend to do master franchise agreements, and that's a big loss of control or difficult for the brand sometimes to deal with. And so it introduces a lot of variety or inconsistency at times internationally. Now, the great news is because there's so much advertising that can be seen because of American television or shows that get out, there's always a pent-up demand for new markets. And they seem to know more, and it comes in. And a lot of times it wasn't about the United States, it was more about Americana that made them successful overseas.
So let's talk about legal issues that you and your company have faced. What are some of the common legal obstacles or issues that you faced, and what are some of the less common issues?
Right. No.
Yeah.
Development is always a kind of a two-sided sword, because once you sell a development agreement, there's an expectation of time, right? How much time are you going to have to open, and how much time is the brand going to allow you to let a market sit kind of vacant? So from a defensive point of view, what happens is sometimes a franchisee will take out a development agreement to try to block other people from coming in the market, and they'll sit on it for a while. There's also an issue of, certain buildings may not represent the future of the brand or the modernization of the brand. And so those renewals become very difficult because, again, the franchisee thinks we've got good business, we should be able to continue to do our business. And it conflicts sometimes with kind of where the future is, what customers are looking for. So an example like that would have been exterior corridor hotels, right, versus high rises or interior corridor. Or it could be just the shape of an A-frame building for a restaurant company versus something that looks more modern and more up to date with what's going on. So the renewal process is a big deal. The other aspect is when you have conflicts with the franchisor over brand standards, sometimes the franchisor will allow a temporary removal from the system. And so when you do that, what happens is they turn off the frequency program, they turn off the reservation system. Well, when you do that, then revenues go down quite a bit. And then there's a lot of acrimony about, can I afford then to renovate, even though they probably should have renovated before. And so those fights are very personal because of the investment made by the franchisee, but also the need of the franchisor to make sure that there is a certain level of consistency across the system.
So, John, based on your experience with the different companies and different brands, both in the lodging and the restaurant side, can you talk about some best practices of in-house attorneys that you've worked with at those companies?
Yeah. I've been really fortunate to have great legal teams in each of the business, each of those three main franchisors, and even now dealing with them as a franchisee. I find that the in-house counsel that takes the time to learn the customers or go to the franchise conferences and really engage with the franchisees makes a huge difference. And I mean, like I was telling Andrea earlier that she was kind of the last, Fisher and Phillips presentation we had with our Blue Roof Association, which is the IHOP franchisee thing. But just, you can see kind of the passion of franchisees that are in the room, a lot of good questions, and working within in-house counsel, it's just the same thing with them, is that if you get to know, if you socialize a little bit, you'll be able to walk in their shoes a bit. I've never had in those three companies where any of the in-house counsel rushed into litigation and hoped to have litigation. And I spent most of my time, again, with IHG, with Popeyes, and with IHOP, being able to negotiate and bring the in-house counsel team in on it to make sure we came up with a resolution that was going to keep the business going for both parties.
So now that you're out of the company, well, you have your own company, you're an entrepreneur. I mean, are there, I'm sure there's a lot of the same challenges, but are there some new challenges that have arisen that you have to deal with in-house and external counsel?
I was trying to figure out some of those items that were going to be an issue is the communication of deadlines becomes very important on this side, right, as a franchisee. The opportunity to, with COVID, everything went screwy pretty quick. So just to be blunt about it, we had a number of projects that were underway that just had to be put on hold, obviously. But the strange thing was coming back out of it and working with our business lawyers. We have a business lawyer, we have an HR attorney on retainer. But when we're dealing with banks and things, it's pretty much us directly, right? We don't have an army or whatever to do it. And so we went to our lender, we're getting ready to open, and the lender says, "Oh, I'm sorry, you're going to have to put in much more collateral." And we're like, "Well, we've got 18 restaurants that you're already financing right now. Why would you need anything more than a signature?" And so just really crazy times that coming out of this economic cycle, there was a real lack of faith in the restaurant and hospitality industries. I was mentioning to you before, I've invested in a hotel in Indiana, and the bank that did the construction financing, as soon as COVID hit, they decided that they were going to pull out of that sector completely. And this is a big national bank. They decided, we're not going to do any more restaurants and hotels. And oh, by the way, you're going to have to repay your construction loan on time, right? Because the hotel was just getting ready to open. And so when we had that kind of back and forth with them, they said, okay, cash call on all the investors on that, which is no fun, especially when something is just open. and you're going to have to pay $1.5 million as a group just so we can extend you by 1 more year so you can find somebody else to take us out. And so that was just really, really difficult to deal with. And so luckily we were able to find somebody to completely take them out before we had our cash call kind of returned. But that was, there's just really a stressful time for a lot of people. On the restaurant side of business, there are thousands and thousands of independent restaurants that went out of business, as well as what I would call weaker or smaller chains. And again, we're very fortunate to be able to have our own purchasing co-op that protected us, and we're able to get supply during that time. We wouldn't have made it through that without having that kind of thing. On the flip side of it, the bad thing is we had hoped that we were going to gain market share, right? And be able to convert a lot of the buildings and things that are out there. And the problem with that is we can't get enough staffing. So we opened 3 restaurants in the last year, and we are still understaffed in those 3 restaurants, which makes it hard to kind of build the base of business we were looking for. So there's just some examples.
No, that's exactly what we were looking for. And so one issue is surviving COVID. And then, as you just touched on, going forward with your business operations, what is COVID opened your eyes to and your team's eyes to in terms of going forward? We heard a few comments earlier today, which I thought were wonderful, about the staff training and cross training and bringing people in, and maybe not having, particularly in the non-union facilities, just a standardized job, but being able to perform a lot of different jobs within one facility. I mean, are those the kinds of things that post-COVID you guys are considering or maybe have already implemented?
Yeah. So we've tried on there. So from and again, I'm speaking mainly to Georgia, and we were very fortunate on the business climate within Georgia that allowed us to stay open throughout that. We were able to, I think in June of 2020, we were allowed to reopen our dining rooms with a 30%, and then that rapidly grew to by September to be fully open with partitions and masking and things. Right now, because I just checked this before I got up here, staffing is our most critical issue, because that's what keeps, so guest satisfaction is difficult. And while guests understand that every place is short-staffed, they really don't appreciate that on an empty stomach, right? So a big deal about breakfast is breaking fast. And so when you're hungry in the morning, you really want to be able to get, your plate of food pretty quickly. And so our struggles have been, so it's two-sided, right? So the people that have stayed with us through the whole time, and when COVID first hit, so March 17th of 2020, we laid off 500 people across the restaurants. And we identified our top 15 people, and we thought those were the ones that were going to help carry us through. Turned out that our top 15 people, only less than half of them wanted to stay in the business at that point. And so we had problems, and again, I think Europe did it pretty well on the whole layoff thing, because Europe went through the businesses, so that way they were retaining their employment instead of putting people on unemployment. Once people went on to unemployment, it basically made them free agents, and it made it difficult to kind of recall them unless they're willing to come back. On the point of cross-training, we tried to do that. But if you're a server, if you're a veteran server, and you're used to having 4 tables each, and they tip pretty well in IHOP, so it's about 20% that they get. Well, now they get 8 tables, or they get 9 tables that's there, and they're pretty efficient in dealing with them, but it's still slow service. When we bring in new servers, they get chased off by our existing servers, because they know that all that's going to happen is a zero-sum game, and new servers are going to take tables, and that's going to then hurt the money. And so we've had to fire good servers that have bad practices in order to be able to hire more people together. So the cross-training thing is important. I really love the discussion on that earlier about the hosts, because when you put a host, I know that when we were talking about ages and hosts and things under 21, right now, if you go into a restaurant on a Saturday morning, you're going to see a bunch of delivery drivers that are standing right in front of the host stand and holding up that real estate from the guests that are waiting to be served, right? And our most profitable channel is the dining room, but yet the delivery is an important part. And so you get a poor host who is, and this is kind of the challenge of hiring teenagers, that confrontation thing is not what they're about, right? And even, we sit them down in a video, we talk about customer service until that first time they're doing it by themselves, and then they just turn into a puddle, right? And then what happens is they don't come back the next day. And so that conflict avoidance, or the ability to deal with conflict, has made it tough. So we really want, in order to have more servers, we want to be able to get our hosts and cross-train them, but we lose them before, we lose some before that happens. And so that's just a fact of nature. What we're doing to combat that is we're opening up pickup windows on the side of the building to move the drivers out of the way. And then everything gets a lot more civil at that point.
So do you see your industry, or your segment of the industry, both on the restaurant and lodging side, going to those future employees or team members in high schools on a vocational program, or is that something you're doing now?
We do that now. We opened a restaurant last May. The only employees that we could get last May were the ones coming that were in high school, so they had the summer off. In August, we found out that we certainly didn't have enough people that were not in school at the time. The other problem, the other challenge with hiring teens is you get their parents. And so, and the parents start dictating schedules. So everything's lovey-dovey the first week, or you get hired, and then all of a sudden somebody had a test, or somebody's got prom, or somebody's got a ball game. And the reliability of that kind of becomes difficult to, from a scheduling point of view. We have general manager meetings every quarter, and we've got this one gentleman is an area manager for us over 5 restaurants. And his key theme was, we got a job for that. So if somebody comes in and says, oh, I only want to work Saturday nights, we're like, we got a job for that, right? Or if we have somebody who wants to be a cook, and we've got a job for that, we'll get you in right away and train you up. But that flexibility is super important at this time, because it's so hard. And again, veteran employees are getting a lot of overtime, and they're enjoying those paychecks, and it's going to be hard. Even though we've upped their wages $5, $6, $7 an hour more than what they were getting, it's still a challenge with that.
Well, I never actually thought about it, the vocational high school, and your comment about when you get the employees, you get their parents, because for any of us out here that have ever coached any youth sports, in any sport, you certainly get the parents when they come into your organization, and I would suspect that's what's happening in the business world as well. So one last comment on the whole, hopefully it'll be one of the last questions I ever ask about COVID, but there was a lot of publicity, particularly in the lodging sector early on with the PPP, and these companies applying for it. Some of them were awarded it real quickly, and mass sums of money, and then some of them kept it, some of it returned it. What was your position on that? Did you get involved in any of that, or did you take a pass, and why?
No, we were very involved in it. Like I said, in March of 2020, when we laid everybody off, that meant that the dining rooms were closed, and we were running maybe with 3 or 4 employees at the time. And what the PPP allowed us to do was to have funds available, of course, to keep people employed. And then we could actually bring some people back once the dining rooms opened up. And so we were able to get it on every one of our restaurants that had been opened at that time. The forgiveness, luckily we had a strong banking relationship. And I know even today with the National Restaurant Association, they're still talking about the need for good banking or financing relationships, because in a downturn like this, it's pretty important to have a relationship. And so we were able to get forgiven for the first round and for the second round. And that my senior partner, the one that we're getting ready to buy out, that really went totally no more risk, became very risk averse at that point, said that's all that kept us open. Because for 2 months, he couldn't even sleep because he thought that we were going to go bankrupt at any time. And so the PPP really was probably one of the best government programs we had ever seen. And certainly on the forgiveness side of it, it's a benefit to not have to have income and not have to pay taxes on it too. So that was a real, that strengthened our balance sheet a little bit to allow us to stay open.
Interesting. So we've talked about labor challenges throughout the day, and with you going forward, what do you see of challenges, things like supply chain and other international events and national events and inflation? What are some of the things that you guys talk about in the boardroom day in, day out with your leadership teams, and how are you prioritizing those challenges?
It's because of inflation that's happening. It's very difficult, right? Because in our restaurants, we probably have half our customers are probably family income about $50,000 a year. And so we could easily price ourselves out of business if we're not careful. But at the same time, every vendor that we have is suffering from supply chain issues. So even though we have a great purchasing co-op that's owned by the franchisees, it still doesn't protect us from the inflation that's happening. And so we predict this year, I think that from a commodity or from all the things that we purchase, the market basket's what it's called, we're going to be up another 12% by the end of the year in costs. And so we spend a lot of time looking at menu pricing and trying to make sure that we can stay ahead of it a little bit, but not from a point where we're going to do damage in the business. And we've seen lots of other restaurants just go expensive. Like I said, I was in Vegas last year, and it seemed like every steak, no matter the size, started at like $80, and then it went up from there. And so that was just kind of an example of what inflation can do, and how there's no way that we're going to be able to sustain the kind of inflation growth that we have. The thing that is also scary right now is kind of the unionization pushes that are there. And, I write expert reports, and just this whole sense of joint employer is really, really scary if anybody, actually pierces that at some point in the future. And I was talking to Kerry Ransom earlier today. I don't want to be held accountable for what another franchisee in the system does, because everything that we do, we have personal guarantees on, we have all our financing and things tied up on it. And so if we were to be lumped in with a franchisor because of something that happened in Louisiana but had no impact on us in Columbus, Georgia, that's scary. And so this thing of these are independent businesses, we're independent business people, it's a real thing. And to sit there and say, if the brand is going to be drug into this, then all of a sudden all costs are going to go up, and the amount of services that we can get from the brand are going to be, reduced, because they won't want to show any aspect of leadership, I think, at that point. So those are the two things that we're really pretty scared about, is inflation. Obviously, the staffing shortages we talked about before, but this joint employer, and it doesn't take much for somebody to start raising a red flag.
Well, not asking you to divulge any confidential information about your business strategy, but we've all seen on the news, particularly in the case of retailers, that one of the tactics that they're using, and we'll see ultimately, it'll be proven out if it's successful or not, and that is portion downsizing, whether it be some type of a beverage drink or a package of pork chops or what have you. I mean, are you seeing that a lot in your business? And instead of serving people 4 sausage links at the IHOP, maybe 3. And I mean, where are you guys in that whole spectrum?
Yeah. So we haven't gone into kind of the downsizing or menu sizing of what goes onto the plate just yet. But from what I hear from the culinary teams, are in the future, there'll be different portion sizes, or there may be, because there's still people out there that are willing to spend. But from trying to keep things in line with whatever the food cost margins, should be operated at, there's going to be menu engineering that happens because of that.
So the other in the supply chain, the other elephant in the room, it seems like we have a room full of elephants these days, but the whole energy cost thing, I mean, that's got to be impacting you all in your operations, everything from the supply chain to day to day. I mean, what kinds of things are you thinking about in solutions or strategies are you looking at?
Yeah. I actually heard from like the delivery drivers that a lot of them are switching from Uber Eats or DoorDash, and they're moving to Instacart, because in Instacart, they're very small market areas that they can drive in. And so having $6 gas or $5 gas or whatever, there's a shift that's happening. And when that happens, then all of a sudden we get more cancellations on orders that are made. So we produce the food, we put it in the to-go equipment, and then they get canceled out on. Sometimes we get paid for that, other times that we don't. But that's an impact. Obviously, like I said, if half our business are families that are under 50,000, they're the ones hardest hit by the inflation on gasoline. And of course, we probably have a lot of employees that are in that financial strata as well. And it's difficult for them to get back and forth. And we hear a lot of things about car problems. You find a lot of things about the length of time it takes to get something repaired. All of those things are difficult right now. Even our kitchen equipment, so the griddles that we use may have three sections in it over a 4-foot table. We may be out on 2 of those sections for 6 months before the right parts come in for that particular piece of equipment. And we got to figure out how to work around that and deal with it.
So this is kind of a tangential question. 25 years ago or so, when I was at EY, we had a group there, not part of our hospitality real estate group, that was really big into pushing forward through an invention they thought they created, but clients were also asking for, and that's this offshoring all the supply chain. Initially started in Mexico for some items, and then it moved to China, and that was going to be the end-all, be-all solution to everything, just in time, market, yada, yada. And it worked for a while, but obviously it's not working now. I mean, where do you see that fitting into the future of your operations?
So our purchasing co-op spends all their time doing that, whether it's paper goods or plastic goods, or if it's going to be chemicals or things. They're looking at all the way down the food chain for any of the commodities that we have. So they're keeping a close eye on corn, trying to figure out, okay, well, how much of this corn is going to go to energy production? How much of it's going to go to feedlots? And so having those experts in place really help out. So from the point of, are we getting our money for our franchise fees? We absolutely are, because of the fact of we've been able to have these agreements in place that kept us out of the situation as independent restaurants. We've got independent restaurant. There's a small barbecue chain that's around us, and they've gone with no menu pricing, no prices on the menu. It's a QR code whenever you go in, because they may be changing prices, who knows, on a daily basis or a weekly basis. And it's a difficult situation unless you've got kind of good contracts and good supply chain management. And so even though supply chain's difficult now, at least we've got a good partner in it that's managing it.
So let me try to wind this up before we turn it over to questions with a forward-looking question. What do you see going forward in the short, interim, and long term? Some of the biggest opportunities and challenges for your company, as well as how hospitality attorneys can help you and play a role in facing those challenges.
That's a good question. So thank you.
Yeah.
If I had the answers.
Always try to ask one I didn't write down.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, it's not in the notes. The main Financing is obviously something that's only going to get more expensive going forward, right? So that's a ticking time clock. So while we're used to 2% loans, 4% loans, or whatever, those are the cost of business is going to have to go up. You got inflation that's going up, right? I think from the risk management point of view and the hospitality attorneys, we really have no clue on what's going to happen on any COVID cases that come in the future, right? Because we've stayed open. We were able to stay open. We had COVID prevention training for each of our employees. They signed the form saying, yes, they're going to follow that. We did all our temperature checks. In Georgia, there's a liability statement that you have to put on the window of the entrance, so that way everybody gets to see it. We still have no idea what, contingent liabilities may be out there, because we don't know. We did the best that we could with the staff that we had, and we don't know if it's good enough, but right now things are pretty good. Just don't know what happens, right? The other aspect is we've really lined, our business attorney has been great as we go through this transition of buying out a senior partner. The brands have been great in kind of conducting their business during that time. Another thing that's just kind of out there that we don't have an answer to is the employee retention tax credit. So we benefited from all that, but we've been taxed on it in 2021. So that's money that we're paying out, but we don't have the funds coming back from the IRS yet, or even a letter that we could have applied toward that from a tax credit. So again, from a financial basis, we felt pretty good. We saw, what the dollars of the ERTC were going to provide, and now we really don't know when we're going to get the money that's in there. So we feel good about it, but we, again, are tight in our management because we don't know if it's going to be another 6 months before we get it, another year. It's a little bit crazy.
That's extremely interesting. I've learned a lot over the course of the last 2 weeks about your segment of the industry and what you do. And I know that there's probably some questions out here. So we'll use our remaining time to turn it over to anybody. I'm sure the good doctor back there has a question or two in his mind, and please fire away.
Well, thank you, gentlemen. That's fascinating information and insight. John, I think anecdotally people will appreciate where the money came from for the original buyout of Holiday Inns. Didn't Bass PLC buy them out?
Yes.
And what they sold all their, like 4,000 pubs, right? Because of the antitrust laws over in the UK.
Right.
So they had to sell all their bars.
Right.
And they raised like billions of dollars selling their bars.
Right.
Yeah. So the alcohol business is alive and well in the United Kingdom, or it was certainly was. And then they took that cash and they rolled it into
building Intercontinental Hotels Group at that point, right? So
yeah.
When Holiday Corp, I have this thing that I do with the college students, and it's called Finance Happens, right? Because I just kind of track my own career, and I kind of say, whoops, here's an inflection point to something that happened. So when I was with Holiday Corp, this would have been back in 1988, 89. There was a guy, so Mike Rose was the CEO. There was Stephen Bolenbach was the CFO. And there was this guy named Donald Trump who decided that the company decided to get in business with him for a casino, right, a Harrah's casino in Atlantic City. And all of a sudden, he got mad because he saw what all the franchise fees were, and he decided that he was going to make a run at the whole company in order to get out of this agreement, right, a bad deal, I guess, in his terms. But what happened was the company had to come up, took on $3 billion in debt in order to pay out every shareholder a $70 one-time dividend, right? When that happened, that caused the fact of turning around and selling first the international rights to the Holiday Inn brand to Bass PLC. And then after that, then Bass bought out the parent company, and what was left over from Hampton Inn, Embassy Suites, Homewood Suites, all those things then moved into Hilton itself. And so we started again in Atlanta. Like I said, we moved our headquarters and things there. So that finance kind of happened. 9/11 was just kind of another big financial event. And really, from the travel industry, that was just as shocking as the Great Recession and what happened, right, as far as just total disruption to business travel on both cases of that. So just a lot of finance happens kind of things that really had nothing to do with the underlying business, but it had to do more with macroeconomic things or just personalities.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. So you had a close encounter with the former guy.
Yeah, something like that.
Like that. Heather, if you don't mind, I'll blow your cover now. And yeah, you guys, Heather's with Legal Seafoods, and is your experience been similar?
Yes. Well, first of all, Legal Seafoods did not survive the pandemic, and we were purchased by an Irish company called Danube Partners. It's private equity, and they're still running the restaurants. They took most of them. They took most of the employees, which we were all very grateful for. But I think the pandemic hit at one of the worst times for most restaurant companies, because the cash flow, I think, in the first quarter is usually very tight. So we've had all the same struggles. Employees are looking for more and more money. People don't really want to work at an office. They want to work at home still. So I think the new company has been great in just understanding what the needs are of the business and doing a really nice job. From a guest standpoint, I think everything has been coming back little by little, but I think we're nearly back to pre-sales revenue. So that's a very good sign.
I'm guessing on the seafood side, supply chain has been an issue.
Yeah, seafood's tough. It's lobster has been very expensive. So, but the group that I now work for owns 2 other brands. They own Smith & Wollensky Steakhouses, and they also own Strega, which is a smaller brand, which was just out of Massachusetts. So it's interesting having 3 different brands to see where one is flourishing, like doing better, they're up, which I think you alluded to the steak, out in Vegas. We have a steakhouse in Vegas, and I was just there visiting, and the steak prices are crazy, but people are willing to splurge on certain items. So I think we're really seeing that business as doing very well, whereas the one is not doing as well. It's pasta, and so I think consumers are deciding where they're going to spend their money, and special event places I think are doing better. That's what we've seen in our 3 concepts.
So the moral of that story, John, is lobster pancakes and ice. That's what the moral is.
Right.
Anybody else? Gentlemen, thank you very much. Appreciate it greatly.